At her friend's engagement party, she whispered, "That should have been us if you were richer." I just smiled. A year later, I walked into the same venue with a ring for someone who actually believed in me. We were at an engagement party for my girlfriend's best friend, Jessica. The venue was one of those ridiculously expensive old mansions that get rented out for events, with crystal chandeliers and waiters in tuxedos. My girlfriend, Veronica, was in her element. I was just trying not to spill anything on my rented suit. I was a software developer, working for a small startup. I made decent money, enough to be comfortable, but I wasn't rich. Not by Veronica's standards anyway. For the 3 years we were together, my modest salary was a constant, low-grade source of disappointment for her. She never said it outright, but it was there in the sighs when we looked at houses online, or the way she'd talk about the European vacations her friends were taking. That night, Jessica was showing off her engagement ring. It was a monster. A huge diamond that probably cost more than my car. Veronica was staring at it with a kind of hungry look in her eyes. Later, while we were standing by the bar, she leaned in close to me. The smell of her expensive perfume was overpowering. "That should have been us if you were richer," she whispered. She didn't say it like a joke. She said it like she was talking about the weather, a simple, unchangeable fact. My 3 years of loyalty, of supporting her through her own career changes, of being the guy she called when her car broke down in the middle of the night, all of it was erased by that one sentence. It all came down to a number in my bank account. And my number wasn't high enough. I just smiled. I didn't argue. I didn't get defensive. I just nodded, like she had made a completely reasonable observation. Something inside me just clicked off. The part of me that had been trying so hard to be the man she wanted, it just gave up. In that moment, surrounded by all that wealth and expectation, I felt a strange kind of peace. I was done. We went home in near silence. The next morning, I woke up before she did and made a pot of coffee. When she came into the kitchen, yawning, I was sitting at the table with 2 empty boxes beside me. "What's with the boxes?" she asked. "You should probably start packing," I said. She stared at me, confused. "Packing for what?" "You're moving out," I said, my voice even. "Last night, you made it very clear I give you the life you want, so I'm letting you go find it." She actually laughed. "Are you serious? You're breaking up with me because of one little comment?" "It wasn't a little comment, Veronica," I said. "It was the truth. Your truth. You deserve to be with someone who can afford the rings you want. That person isn't me, so we're done." The look on her face when she realized I was serious was something I'll never forget. It wasn't sadness. It was annoyance. I had inconvenienced her. I had disrupted her 5-year plan without her permission. She moved out a week later, into a small apartment her parents helped her pay for. The breakup was surprisingly clean at first. We didn't have many shared assets. The apartment was my lease. The car was mine. We just split up the furniture we had bought together. The first escalation came about a month later. It was a social media campaign led by Jessica. Veronica had clearly spun a story where I was the villain. The narrative was that I was an insecure, jealous man who couldn't handle being with a successful woman who had ambitious friends. Jessica posted a picture of her and Veronica with a caption about how real friends support you when a weak man tries to hold you back. A few of our mutual friends took the bait. I got a couple of texts from people telling me I was a jerk for how I had treated her. I didn't respond to any of them. I just went quiet. Instead of fighting her on social media, I focused on my work. The little startup I worked for was a risk. We were a small team, working on a new piece of financial software that we thought could be a game changer. I had taken a lower salary in exchange for a significant amount of stock options. It was a gamble. Veronica had always called it my little computer project and had told me I should get a real job at a big, stable corporation. For the next 6 months, I did nothing but work. I was at the office 12, sometimes 15 hours a day. I poured everything I had into that software. My social life disappeared. I lost touch with the friends who had taken her side. It was a lonely, exhausting time. But every time I felt like giving up, I would just remember her whisper in that crowded room. And then the gamble paid off. A huge multinational bank acquired our little startup. The deal was massive. and my stock options, the ones Veronica had mocked, were suddenly worth a staggering amount of money. I'm not talking about buy a new car money. I'm talking about never have to work another day in your life money. I didn't change my life overnight. I stayed at the company through the transition as part of the deal. I bought a new truck, a nice one, but not a flashy sports car. I kept my apartment. The only person who knew the full extent of my new wealth was my financial advisor. And then I met someone. Her name was Hannah. She was a teacher at a local elementary school. We met at a dog park. My scruffy mutt started a wrestling match with her golden retriever. We started talking, and it was just easy. She didn't ask what I did for a living until our third date. When I told her I was a software developer, she just nodded. She was more interested in talking about a book she was reading. She was smart, funny, and kind. She didn't care about money. She cared about what kind of person you were. A year after I met Hannah, a year to the day of Jessica's engagement party, I decided it was time. The first step was the venue. I called the events manager at the same mansion where the party had been. I told her I wanted to book the entire estate for a private event on a specific Saturday night. I told her I was planning a surprise birthday party for my girlfriend. I paid the exorbitant fee without blinking. The next step was the guest list. I knew that Veronica and Jessica were still best friends. I also knew that Jessica and her now husband Tom still hung out with a lot of our old mutual friends. So I did something a little manipulative. I reached out to Tom, who was a decent guy who had always been caught in the middle of Jessica and Veronica's drama. I told him that I was throwing a huge, all-expenses-paid party for a bunch of my old friends to celebrate some recent success. I told him I wanted to bury the hatchet, that life was too short for bad blood. I invited him and Jessica, and I told him to invite everyone from our old friend group. I knew that if Jessica was invited, she would bring Veronica. It was a Trojan horse. The day of the party arrived. Hannah had no idea what was really happening. She thought we were just going to a fancy birthday dinner for one of my old colleagues. When we pulled up to the mansion, she was stunned. "This is for a colleague?" she asked, her eyes wide. "He's a very successful colleague," I said, smiling. We walked in and the place was packed. All the old faces were there. Jessica and Tom, all the friends who had ghosted me. And standing by the bar, holding a glass of champagne, was Veronica. She was with some new guy, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit. She saw me, and a slow, smug smile spread across her face. She saw me in my nice but not ridiculously expensive suit. She saw Hannah, in her simple but elegant dress. She saw the guy she had written off back in the same room where she had delivered her verdict. She thought she knew how the story went. She and Jessica made their way over to us. Well, Veronica said, looking me up and down. "Look what the cat dragged in. I'm surprised you could afford the cover charge here, Alex." Before I could respond, Jessica chimed in. "Be nice, V. He's trying. It's sweet that your new boss is letting you use his party to impress your new girlfriend." I just smiled. Something like that. I spent the next hour mingling. I talked to the old friends who had taken her side. I was polite, friendly. I didn't bring up the past. I let them all believe their own version of the story. The story where I was a struggling, bitter ex, and Veronica was the one who had escaped to a better life. And then, it was time for the main event. The catering staff brought out a huge birthday cake. The lights dimmed. I got up on the small stage where the band had been playing. "Thank you all for coming," I said into the microphone. "I know this is a surprise for some of you. A year ago, I was in this very room, and it was a difficult night for me. A lot has changed since then." I saw Veronica whisper something to Jessica, a smirk on her face. "I'm not a big speech guy," I continued, "but I wanted to get you all here to celebrate a new chapter in my life, and I wanted to do it here, in this room, to prove a point. A point to myself, that a year can change everything." I looked over at Hannah, who was watching me with a confused but happy expression. "Hannah," I said, and my voice cracked a little, "you walked into my life when I was at my lowest. You didn't see a struggling guy with a crazy idea. You saw me. You believed in me. You didn't care about the money I had or didn't have. You cared about the person I was." I walked over to her, got down on one knee, and pulled out a small velvet box. "This isn't a birthday party," I said, my voice shaking. "This is for you. I opened the box. Inside was a ring, a monster, a diamond that made Jessica's look like a grain of sand. The entire room gasped. "Hannah," I said, looking up at her tear-filled eyes, "will you marry me?" She just nodded, unable to speak, and I slid the ring onto her finger. The room erupted in applause. All of my old friends, the ones who had doubted me, were cheering. I stood up, kissed my fiancée, and then I looked across the room. I found Veronica. She was just standing there, her face a pale mask of shock. Her new, rich boyfriend was staring at the ring on Hannah's finger with his jaw hanging open. Jessica was looking back and forth between the ring and me, the pieces clicking into place in her head. Veronica understood. She understood that this whole night, this whole party wasn't for Hannah's birthday. It wasn't to celebrate my success. It was for her. It was a response, a year in the making, to her whisper at the bar. I had brought her back to the scene of the crime to show her, in front of everyone she knew, just how wrong she had been. The rest of the night was a blur of congratulations. Tom, Jessica's husband, came over and shook my hand, a look of genuine respect in his eyes. "Well played, man," he said. "Well played." Jessica and Veronica disappeared without saying goodbye. The fallout was quiet but devastating. I heard through the grapevine that Veronica and her new boyfriend had a massive fight on the way home. He was furious that she had so dramatically underestimated my financial situation. Their relationship, which was built on the shaky foundation of her upgrading from me, crumbled. They broke up a week later. Jessica sent me a long, rambling apology text a few days after the party. She said she had no idea that Veronica had twisted the story, that she was so sorry for how she had treated me. I just replied, "Okay." My wedding to Hannah was 6 months later. It was a small private affair, just our close friends and family. It wasn't in a big, fancy mansion. It was in the backyard of the beautiful new house we had bought together. The house I paid for in cash. The revenge wasn't the money. It wasn't the ring. It was the look on Veronica's face when she realized that the boring guy she had thrown away had built a life more beautiful, more successful, and more full of love than she could have ever imagined. She had judged me based on my bank account, and I had shown her that a man's real worth is something you can't put a price on. At my birthday dinner, she raised a toast and said, "To my future divorce settlement." Everyone burst out laughing. I laughed too and said, "Funny you say that. I already transferred everything to my sister's name yesterday." The room went silent. The restaurant was loud, expensive, and filled with the kind of people who think charm is a substitute for a personality. It was my 40th birthday dinner, an event my wife Amelia had insisted on hosting. It wasn't a celebration of me, of course. It was a performance for her friends, a chance to show off the latest phase of her 5-year plan. I was just the main prop. We were at the end of the meal. The waiter had just set a ridiculously small, architecturally ambitious dessert in front of me with a single candle flickering on top. Amelia's best friend, a woman named Claire, who had the warm, empathetic eyes of a shark, tapped her champagne glass with a manicured nail. "A toast," she announced, "to the birthday boy." Amelia stood up, glass in hand, a beatific smile plastered on her face. She looked every bit the part of the adoring wife. She let the chatter die down, ensuring she had the full attention of the table, her parents, her sister, and her 3 best friends, the inner circle of her life's board of directors. "To my wonderful husband," she began, her voice dripping with fake sincerity. "A man of simple tastes, but a generous heart." A few of her friends snickered. "And," she continued, her smile widening as she locked eyes with Claire, "to my future, the one we've all been working so hard on, to my future divorce settlement." The table erupted. Not just laughter, but a wave of triumphant, howling glee. Claire raised her glass and shouted, "Get that bag, girl!" They all burst out laughing again, a coven of hyenas celebrating a successful hunt. They thought it was the funniest, most audacious joke in the world, a public acknowledgement of the long-running con they were all in on. I didn't get angry. I didn't look hurt. I laughed too. A real, genuine laugh. It was the laugh of a man who had been patiently waiting for the punchline, and it was even better than he had imagined. I stood up, picked up my own champagne glass, and smiled at my wife. "That's hilarious, honey," I said, my voice carrying easily across the suddenly quiet table. "Funny you should say that." I took a sip of champagne, letting the moment hang in the air. I already transferred everything into an irrevocable trust in my sister's name yesterday. But happy birthday to me, I guess. The silence that fell over that table was the most beautiful sound I have ever heard. It was a dense, heavy, and deeply satisfying silence. The kind of silence that follows a massive, unexpected explosion. The laughing faces froze, the smiles melted away, replaced by masks of pure, uncomprehending horror. Amelia just stared at me, the color draining from her face, her glass trembling in her hand. They thought I was the mark. They had no idea I was the one running the sting operation. Let me be very clear. I am not a wimp. I am not a simp. I am a senior investigator for a major insurance company. I don't sit in an office. I work in the Special Investigations Unit, the department that handles high-value, complex fraud. My job is to look at a perfectly manicured life and find the lie holding it all together. I spend my days sifting through financial records, conducting surveillance, and interviewing people who have turned deception into an art form. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in patterns. And for the last year, my own marriage had been my most fascinating case file. I met Amelia 4 years ago. She was working in art curation, a job that paid very little but offered a maximum of social prestige. She came from a family that had the appearance of wealth, but was, as I would later discover, a house of cards built on a mountain of debt. I was a different kind of project for her. I didn't come from money, but I had made my own. I was stable, successful, and to her, I suspect, deeply boring. I was not her dream, I was her financial safety net. I wasn't a fool. I saw the red flags from the beginning. The way she'd casually mention her friend's new vacation home, the way her needs always seemed to scale up perfectly with my latest bonus. But I was, for a time, a willing participant. I had spent a decade of my life in the cynical, dirty world of fraud investigation. Amelia, for all her flaws, was a departure from that. Our life together was simple. I thought, perhaps foolishly, that my stability could provide a foundation for something real. That she would eventually outgrow the shallow materialism of her upbringing. Our marriage was a calculated risk. I insisted on a prenuptial agreement that protected all my pre-existing assets. She had laughed it off, calling it an unromantic formality, but she signed it. For 3 years, I played the part of the devoted, slightly oblivious husband. I funded her lifestyle. I paid off her lingering student debt. I financed the down payment on the beautiful home that was now, legally, our marital property. I was investing in the partnership, waiting to see if it would ever pay a genuine dividend of loyalty and respect. The investigation into my own life began 3 months ago. It started with a single, anomalous data point. A credit card statement that showed a recurring monthly charge for a consulting service I'd never heard of. It was for $500, a small enough amount to fly under the radar. But my job has made me pathologically attentive to detail. I did some digging. The consulting service was run by a woman who billed herself as a lifestyle strategist. A quick search revealed that she was, in fact, a high-end divorce coach, a woman who specialized in helping wealthy women maximize their settlements. My wife was paying a divorce coach while married to me. That was the moment the professional in me took over. The husband was sidelined, and the investigator clocked in. I didn't confront her. You never alert the subject that they are under investigation. You just quietly start building your case. I treated my own life like a fraud claim. I began a full-scale forensic audit of my wife. I placed a keylogger on our home computer. I put a GPS tracker on the car I had bought for her. I used my professional resources to do a deep dive into her finances and the finances of her inner circle. What I found was a conspiracy. Amelia and her friends, led by the divorce coach-in-chief, Qley, had been planning this for over a year. Their group chat, which I now had full access to, was a treasure trove of evidence. It was a step-by-step playbook for how to fleece a husband. They discussed which assets were marital property. They strategized about how to provoke me into an affair to get an infidelity clause. They even had a timeline. The plan was to wait until our 4th anniversary, then file for divorce, take half the value of the house, and secure a generous alimony package. My birthday dinner was supposed to be a sort of pre-victory celebration, a final joke at the expense of the fool who was funding his own destruction. They had made a critical error. They had underestimated their opponent. They thought I was just a boring insurance guy. They had no idea my job was to hunt people exactly like them for a living. 2 days before my birthday dinner, I took action. My sister is a partner at a top law firm, specializing in asset protection. I spent an entire day in her office. We didn't just transfer everything to her name. That's amateur hour, and easily challenged in court. We executed a series of complex, legally airtight maneuvers. We created an irrevocable family trust, a legal fortress designed to be impenetrable in a divorce proceeding. We transferred all of my premarital assets, my investment portfolio, and the majority of my liquid cash into this trust. My sister was the trustee. Then we had the business I owned formally acquire the house, our primary marital asset, in exchange for a majority share in a new holding company, which was also owned by the trust. In the span of 8 hours, I had legally and permanently moved every significant asset I owned out of the reach of my wife and the state's divorce courts. The only thing left in our joint names was a checking account with a few $1,000s in it and a mountain of shared debt from her lavish spending. So when I sat at that dinner and she made her toast, I wasn't faking my laugh. It was the purest, most satisfying laugh of my life. I had spent 3 months investigating the biggest fraud case of my career, and I had just closed the file. Update 1. The scene at that restaurant after I dropped my little bombshell was a thing of beauty. It was like watching a movie in slow motion. The laughing faces froze, the champagne glasses stopped halfway to their lips, and then the panic set in. Amelia just stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Claire, the divorce coach, was the first to recover. She let out a sharp, nervous laugh. "That's not funny, Mark," she said. "You can't just do that." "Do what?" I asked, taking a calm sip of my water. "Protect my assets? Actually, I can, and I did. It was a very productive day yesterday." The party was over. The check was paid, by me, the final ironic twist, and the ride home was a masterclass in silent fury. Amelia didn't say a word. She just stared out the window, her mind no doubt racing, trying to figure out if I was bluffing. When we got back to the house, the mask of the sophisticated, composed woman fell away, and the greedy, terrified creature underneath emerged. "What did you do?" she hissed, the moment the door closed behind us. "I took a piece of professional advice I often give my own clients," I said, unbuttoning my cuffs. "When you suspect you are the target of a long-term premeditated fraud, you take immediate and decisive action to mitigate your losses." "Fraud?" she shrieked. "I'm your wife." "Are you?" I asked. I walked over to the bookshelf, pulled out a thick, leather-bound binder, and dropped it on the coffee table. It was my case file. "Because this file suggests you're a co-conspirator in a plot to defraud me of my assets upon the dissolution of our marriage. A marriage you have been actively planning to end for over a year." I opened the binder. The first page was a printout of the invoice from Claire's consulting service. The next few pages were color-coded charts showing the flow of money from my accounts to her lavish lifestyle. And then, the main event, 100 pages of printed, time-stamped messages from their group chat. I let her read for a few minutes. I watched her face turn from red with anger to ghostly white with fear as she saw her own words, her own plans, laid out in black and white. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "I'm an investigator, Amelia," I said. "It's what I do. You were so busy planning the perfect crime, you never once stopped to consider that you were married to the perfect detective." The fight, the real one, went on for hours. She cried, she screamed, she denied. She blamed Claire. She blamed her friends. She blamed me. It was a textbook performance from a subject who knows they've been caught. The next morning, she was gone. She had packed a bag and gone to stay with her parents. Her lawyer called my lawyer, my sister, that afternoon. And that's when the second and most beautiful phase of the consequences began. My sister is a shark. She didn't just confirm that the assets were in an irrevocable trust. She went on the offensive. She informed Amelia's lawyer that we had a comprehensive file of evidence proving a conspiracy to commit fraud. She explained that if Amelia chose to contest the trust in a lengthy and expensive court battle, we would not only win, but we would also file a separate civil suit against her, her sister, and her friend Claire for the $65,000 they had stolen from me. Oh, did I forget to mention that? In my audit, I had also uncovered a little side hustle where Amelia and her sister were using our joint credit card to buy designer clothes, wear them once, and then return them, a pattern of behavior that constituted, you guessed it, a form of fraud. Amelia's lawyer, who was probably some local guy used to simple divorces, was completely out of his depth. He was facing a top-tier law firm with a mountain of evidence. He advised her to take a settlement. The terms I offered were brutal, and they were non-negotiable. She would agree to an uncontested divorce. She would walk away with zero claim to any of my assets, past, present, or future. The house would be sold, and after the mortgage was paid off, the remaining equity would be split. After I had deducted the $65,000 she had stolen, plus my legal fees, she would end up with next to nothing. While she was dealing with that legal nightmare, I moved on to her support network. It was time to deal with the coven. Update 2. My revenge against her friends wasn't about being loud. It was about being precise. It was about using the information I had gathered to dismantle the very foundations of their comfortable, arrogant lives. Claire, the divorce coach, was the first target. She was the architect of the whole plan. My investigation had revealed that she was not just giving bad advice, she was operating in a legally gray area. She wasn't a licensed lawyer, but she was providing specific legal and financial strategies to her clients for a fee. I compiled a detailed report, complete with testimonials I had found from other disgruntled former clients online, and sent it, anonymously, to the state's Bar Association and the Attorney General's office for investigation into the unauthorized practice of law. Her little consulting business is now the subject of a major state-level investigation. Her career is likely over. The other two friends in the hive were simpler. One of them, a woman named Becca, worked in public relations for a large, very family-friendly corporation. Her social media was a curated mess of her partying, her casual drug use, and her generally terrible life choices. I simply compiled a greatest hits of her public posts and sent it to her company's HR department with a note. As a shareholder, I am deeply concerned about the public behavior of your employees and the potential risk to your brand's image. She was fired for violating the company's morality clause within a week. The final friend, Jessica, was married to a man who was a partner at a rival insurance firm, a man I knew professionally. I simply arranged to have a coffee with him. I didn't show him the group chat. I just told him, man to man, that I had recently uncovered some deeply troubling information during my divorce proceedings that involved his wife. I told him I thought he had a right to know that his wife had been actively coaching my wife on how to commit marital fraud. Then, I gave him the name of a very good forensic accountant. I don't know what happened after that, but I saw him a few weeks later, and he was no longer wearing his wedding ring. In the span of a month, Amelia's entire support system had been systematically and surgically dismantled. The friends who had laughed at her joke were now unemployed, under investigation, or in the middle of their own messy divorces. They had all turned on each other, blaming Amelia for bringing a monster into their lives. She was completely, utterly alone. Final update: it has been 3 months since my birthday dinner. The divorce was finalized last week. As predicted, after the sale of the house and the deduction of the money she and her sister had stolen, Amelia walked away with less than $10,000. A pathetic severance package for 3 years of what she thought was a brilliant investment. She had to move back in with her parents. Her father, whose business was already struggling, had to take out a second mortgage to cover the legal fees from her divorce and the impending lawsuit from Uncle Ron against Megan. Oh yeah, that happened too. The entire family is on the verge of financial ruin, their reputation in their community destroyed. I got a call from her last week, from a blocked number. It was the call I had been waiting for. She was crying, of course. She said her life was over. She said she was sorry. She said she had been a fool. She asked if there was any way I could just help her. I let her finish. When she was done, there was a long silence. "I'm an investigator, Amelia," I finally said, my voice completely flat. "My job is to assess risk, and you, your family, your friends, you are the riskiest asset I have ever encountered. A normal person would just walk away. But I don't just walk away from a bad investment. I write it off, and I make sure it can never, ever be listed on the market again." I continued, "You thought you were playing a game. But this wasn't a game. This was a claim. You filed a fraudulent claim against my life, and I just spent the last 3 months doing my job. I investigated, I documented, and I denied the claim with extreme prejudice. The difference between you and the other criminals I deal with is that they usually have the sense to know when they've been caught. I hung up the phone and blocked the number. I'm sitting in my new apartment now. It's smaller, more minimalist. It's a place of order and logic. I sold the big craftsman house. It had too many bad memories. My life is quiet now, and it is entirely my own. My revenge wasn't about a single moment of triumph. It was a slow, methodical, and comprehensive audit of a corrupt system. She and her friends thought they were smart. They thought they were players. But they were just amateurs, trying to run a simple con on a man who dismantles professional con artists for a living. They thought they could take me for everything I had. They just never realized that the most valuable thing I own is the one thing they could never understand: the absolute, unwavering certainty that in the end, the books always have to balance, and I am always the one who balances them.